We're going to go to the business very slightly later because I wanted to bring you the very latest on those European stock markets that have been opening. There have been slight rises on the Asian ones, but how's it going in Europe? We're going to start with crude oil markets as they try to bounce back after their worst day since 1991. And France 24's business editor, Brian Quinn, is here with us on set with the latest. Brian.
Well, Stuart, commodities markets are aiming for some measure of a recovery after huge drops on Monday. That crash on crude oil markets triggering a global equity sell-off as a deal between the OPEC oil cartel and Russia to prop up prices by production cuts fell apart over the weekend. That's sparking expectations of a full-on price war over crude. On Monday, saw oil prices drop 25%. Brent and West Texas Intermediate have made some significant gains Tuesday, though nowhere near enough to recoup yesterday's losses. Brent futures and WTI currently approaching up 5%. Brent trading around $35.97 a barrel. WTI futures at $32.66 a barrel. Monday's oil shock came as markets were already losing ground as efforts to stem the spread of the COVID-19 coronavirus take a serious toll on economies worldwide. After Wall Street indexes lost over 7% on Monday, U.S. President Donald Trump announced his administration would be taking major steps to safeguard the American economy. The president announced he'd be seeking a payroll tax cut as he meets with congressional leaders later today. Well, France 24's chief business editor Stephen Carroll is standing by at the Paris Stock Exchange now, where trading has just gotten underway about 20 minutes ago. Stephen, how's it going there? Are we seeing a recovery so far today on the markets?
Brian, you can see it on the boards behind me here. The CAC 40 opening in the green, although not by as much as we had been expected. The market had been called to open around 2% higher after falling by more than 8% on Monday, its worst day since 2008. But the recovery has been less than was expected. The CAC 40 opening up by about 1.4%, and it's sort of maintaining around that level now, about 20 minutes into trading today. Now, most of the shares are seeing some sort of recovery, but really very minimal compared to the falls that we saw yesterday. They've nowhere near recovered the losses on Monday. If we take a look at some of the most sensitive shares to the price of oil that you were just talking about, the oil company Total, its shares up 3.5% in Paris a short time ago. Air France, airlines among that sector that should benefit from cheaper oil prices, but they were caught up in the mass sell-off yesterday because, of course, there are fears about who's going to fly as this coronavirus outbreak continues to spread. Its shares fell by 9% yesterday. They're only up by about 3% today, so a very small portion of those losses being recovered in trading today. We're also keeping an eye on a couple of banks for you today as well, and that's because there are two French banks that are particularly exposed to Italy, and that's the other piece of news that investors are digesting today, and that's that extension of the quarantine to the whole of Italy. Crédit Agricole saw huge falls yesterday in its shares. It's only up by about 1% today. Société Générale was down by almost 18% on Monday. Today it's only up by 1%, so really a lot of caution still out there among investors about where they can put their money and what's going to happen next. And while we are seeing this very small technical recovery, really we're no indication that the markets are moving on from what happened yesterday, or indeed their general fears around the coronavirus. In Asia earlier, it was a similar picture in trading on Asian markets. We had very small gains across the main Asian bourses. Shanghai and Hong Kong both up by over 1%. But really that picture is of very cautious and minor recovery on the markets today.
Also, some tepid gains at best today. How long do we think that this market uncertainty could last for, Stephen?
Well, it's really as long as the uncertainty over the coronavirus outbreaks lasts. If you speak to most market traders, they're using words like thin and fragile to describe what's happening on the markets today. It really is just a technical recovery, a very small bounce back after yesterday's share falls. What they're going to be keeping an eye out for are things like what steps are being taken by policymakers. You mentioned Donald Trump talking about payroll tax cuts. Investors like those sort of announcements. That usually is expected to give a bounce to the markets. And it's interesting that the response has been so muted in Europe and in Asia. Of course, Wall Street not open for a few hours yet, so we'll see what the reaction is on American share markets later. Central banks around the world have been taking steps to try and ease the pain from the coronavirus. We've had rate cuts in the United States by the Federal Reserve, action taken by the Bank of Japan as well, but we are waiting to see what the European Central Bank will do about it. They haven't taken any major steps yet. We'll be waiting for their decision on Thursday. to see if Christine Lagarde and her job as the chief in the central bank will be to take action to support the European economy. That's after warnings that we've had of major European economies, Italy and Germany, facing the prospect of a recession if the coronavirus outbreak doesn't come under control anytime soon. There is an index that tracks all of the volatility on the stock markets. We call it the fear index, and fear is still pretty high on the markets out there. We're still looking at levels that are not far off those in 2008. Then, of course, we had several days of major falls before we saw any sort of a recovery, and it didn't come quickly. This time around, it could be argued the situation is even more uncertain.
All right, so nowhere near out of the woods yet. We'll be keeping a close eye on those European markets as the day goes on. Stuart, that's it for business. I'll hand it back to you.
My fear index is up here somewhere. Thank you very much, Brian. Thanks to Stephen as well.